All right, so it looks like we're diving into the world of note-taking apps today,
Wow.
specifically Notion and Obsidian. Yeah, you guys send in a ton of stuff, articles, forum threads, even some academic papers.
Oh, wow.
I mean, people get really passionate about their note-taking systems.
It's true. It's
And
like it really is a reflection of how people think, you know?
yeah, and you've got people saying they ditch Notion for Obsidian when they get serious with their writing, and others are like, Obsidian is so much faster than Notion, so we're gonna try to figure out which one is for you. Is that
Exactly.
ready to go?
Absolutely. Let's map this out. So, Notion basically calls itself your all-in-one workspace.
Okay.
You know, the hub for your notes, tasks, wikis,
Oh, wow.
pretty much everything.
So it's tempting, right? Like get everything into one place.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But what happens if Notion goes down or if you're offline?
Right. That's the trade-off with Notion. It's cloud-based, right?
Yeah.
Great for
Good.
teams, for syncing. But yeah, all your data is living on their servers.
Not so good for the privacy folks, huh?
Not really, no.
Yeah, we've got some forum discussions about data privacy.
Right. It's a whole nother layer to this
I
decision.
totally.
And that's where Obsidian comes in. It's a totally different approach. Local storage, first and foremost.
Okay.
So your notes live on your hard drive, period.
So no worries about Notion sharing data with AI conspiracies then.
Yeah, no kidding.
Haha. But hold on. If it's all local, are you stuck on one device? How do you even access your notes on the go?
Good question. So Obsidian is designed to work offline first, right? But there are workarounds. People are getting pretty creative,
Oh, like what?
like syncing their Obsidian folders with things like Dropbox. They're basically building their own syncing systems.
That's hardcore.
But risky, right? For sure.
Yeah.
Definitely some downsides. You don't want to lose all your notes because of a syncing problem.
No, definitely not. So it sounds like Notion is the sleek online workspace. And Obsidian is more like the haven for control freaks.
Uh-huh. Something like that.
But let's get into the nitty-gritty. How do these philosophies actually play out when you're using the apps?
Yeah, I mean, the user interface is a big difference. Notion is very visual, drag and drop, very easy to use. Obsidian, on the other hand, is built around Markdown.
Ah, Markdown. Plain text, but with some formatting magic.
Exactly.
For anyone who's not familiar, it's like coding, but way less intense.
It is. And once you get it, it's super powerful and fast.
And that speed is really important to Obsidian, isn't it?
It is. Because those plain text files are just so much snappier than what Notion has to deal with.
So it's visual ease versus raw efficiency.
Yeah, pretty much.
Kind of like choosing between like a fancy automatic car
Right.
or a stick shift sports car, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Both get you there, but the experience is different.
For sure. And this difference also shows up in how they handle collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. So Notion has all this built-in stuff for working together. But for Obsidian, you need a paid add-on to do any kind of team stuff.
So if you're a solo note taker, Obsidian's free plan is actually pretty great.
It is. But yeah, Notion's free version is more limited, especially for storage.
So each one has its strengths and weaknesses. But speaking of strengths, can we go back to Obsidian's knowledge graph for a second? It's this idea that your notes can form like a web of connected ideas. I'm not sure I'm picturing it.
Okay, yeah, so imagine you're researching something. Like, let's say, the history of chocolate.
Okay, I'm with you.
You make a note about its origins in Mesoamerica. Then later on, you're reading about chocolate in European courts, right? You create a new note for that. But you also link it back to your original note about the origins.
Oh, I see. So you're not just storing information, you're building these pathways between ideas.
Exactly.
But why not just use folders?
Well, the knowledge graph isn't about strict hierarchies like folders. It's about how our brains actually work, right?
Oh,
One thought can lead to a bunch of others. And those connections can go anywhere.
so it's less like a filing cabinet, more like a sprawling jungle of ideas.
That's a great way to put it.
And you mentioned that this can actually reveal connections you might have missed otherwise?
It can.
How does that work?
So as your knowledge graph grows, all those links between your notes, they start to create a visual map of your ideas.
Okay.
Let's say you're adding notes about the chemistry of chocolate, or its impact on global trade, maybe even its portrayal in art.
I like where this is going.
You might suddenly see a connection between, like, the chemicals that make chocolate taste good and its symbolic meaning in different cultures.
Whoa, that's cool.
It is. Things that seem totally unrelated now have this thread running between them.
So Obsidian is like your research assistant, pointing out things you might not have noticed.
Exactly. It's not just about storing information. It's about understanding the bigger picture.
Okay. The knowledge graph is definitely cool, but learning Markdown, setting up those connections, figuring out syncing, it all seems a lot less user-friendly than Notion, doesn't it?
It does have a steeper learning curve, that's for sure. It's more for people who like to tinker, to experiment, to customize.
Right, if you're comfortable with a bit of code, you'll probably love it. So it's like baking a cake from scratch versus using a mix, you know?
Oh, I like that analogy.
Uh-huh. Both can be satisfying,
Yeah, for sure.
but one takes more effort.
Definitely.
But speaking of trying new things, some of the stuff you sent in mentioned some pretty interesting features, like what's the deal with Notion AI?
Oh, yeah. Notion AI is basically like having a superpowered research assistant built into the app. It can summarize notes, brainstorm ideas, even translate stuff.
That sounds awesome. What's the catch?
Well, like with any AI, there's the whole accuracy thing and potential bias, you know?
Right, right.
Plus, you are giving your data to an algorithm. Some people might not be comfortable with that.
That's a good point. And you also mentioned something about Obsidian's Canvas feature. Sounds very visual.
Yeah, Obsidian Canvas is newer,
Oh.
but people are loving it, especially for brainstorming and big projects. You can literally create a visual map of your notes and how they connect.
So like dragging and dropping notes onto a canvas, connecting them with lines and arrows.
Yeah, exactly.
And you add images and videos too?
Yeah. It's a great way to get a bird's eye view of a project. See how your ideas fit together. You can even present your thinking to other people.
It's like building a presentation, but for your own brain.
Exactly.
This whole conversation is making me think that maybe choosing between Notion and Obsidian isn't really an either thing. Maybe
Yeah.
it's more like having different tools for different jobs.
I think you're right. Some people might use Notion for work stuff or tasks that need a really structured database. And then they use Obsidian for personal knowledge management
Hmm?
or research or creative writing.
So it's less about finding the perfect app and more about understanding which one works best for you.
Exactly.
But if someone's still on the fence, what advice would you give them?
Try them both out. Both apps have free versions. There's no risk in just playing around with them. Create some test notes. See what the features are like. Figure out which one feels more natural.
I like that. It's all about finding the tool that helps you think better and work smarter. But before we all rush to download both apps, let's take a step back and think about the bigger picture for a second. We've talked about features and all that, but what about the price tag? How do these apps compare when it comes to cold, hard cash?
Well, Obsidian's free plan is actually pretty impressive. You get all the core features, so it's great for personal use. Notion's free plan is a bit more limited, especially with storage and guest access.
So Notion's free plan is more of a trial run then.
Kind of, yeah. But with Obsidian, you have to watch out for the add-ons. Those can get expensive if you need things like syncing or publishing.
So it might not be as free as it seems at first glance.
Exactly.
Okay, so both have their pros and cons when it comes to cost. But can we go back to Obsidian's knowledge graph for a sec? This idea of notes forming a web of connected ideas. I'm not sure I fully get it.
It's like, imagine you have a mind map, but it builds itself as you go. Let's say you're researching the history of chocolate. You create a note about its origins in Mesoamerica.
Okay, I'm following.
Later, you come across information about chocolate's role in European courts, so you create a separate note for that. But this time, you link it back to your original note on the origins.
So you're not just storing info, you're creating these pathways between ideas.
Exactly. It's like building a choose-your-own-adventure book, but for your brain.
I love that. But couldn't you do something similar with folders and subfolders? What makes the knowledge graph so special?
Well, the knowledge graph is less about rigid hierarchies and more about how our minds actually work. One thought can trigger dozens of others, and those connections can go in any direction.
So less like a filing cabinet, more like a sprawling, interconnected jungle of ideas.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, as your knowledge graph grows, it can reveal connections you might have missed otherwise.
Okay, how does that happen?
All those links you create between notes start to form a visual representation of your ideas. Let's say you add notes about the chemistry of chocolate, its impact on global trade, even its portrayal in art and literature. Suddenly, you might see a surprising link between the chemical compounds that make chocolate taste good and its symbolic significance in different cultures.
Wow, that's fascinating. Things that seem completely unrelated are suddenly connected by this invisible thread.
Exactly. Obsidian is like a research assistant, constantly whispering, hey, have you considered this connection?
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal of this knowledge graph thing, but learning Markdown, setting up these knowledge webs, it all seems pretty complicated compared to Notion, right?
It does have a steeper learning curve, for sure. It's more for people who enjoy tinkering, customizing their setup.
So if you're comfortable with code or you like a challenge, that's part of the appeal.
Exactly. It's like the difference between baking a cake from scratch versus using a mix.
Huh.
Both can be satisfying, but one requires more effort and experimentation.
I love that analogy. Speaking of experimentation, some of the sources you sent in mentioned some cool features like Notion AI. What is that all about?
Notion AI is like having a built-in research assistant on steroids. It can summarize your notes, brainstorm ideas, even translate languages.
That sounds amazing. Too good to be true.
Well, like any AI, there are concerns about accuracy and bias. And you're essentially giving your data to an algorithm, which might not sit well with some people.
That's a good point. You have to weigh the benefits against the potential downsides.
Exactly.
You also mentioned something about Obsidian's Canvas feature. Sounds pretty neat.
Yeah, Obsidian Canvas is a newer feature, but it's quickly becoming a favorite for brainstorming and managing complex projects. It lets you create a visual map of your notes and connections, kind of like a dynamic mind map.
So you can drag and drop notes onto a virtual canvas, connect them with lines and arrows, and add images or videos. That's amazing. It's like making a presentation, but for your own ideas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's great for getting a big picture view of a project and seeing how different ideas relate to each other.
This is making me realize that maybe Notion and Obsidian aren't mutually exclusive. It's more like having different tools in your toolbox.
You got it.
Yeah.
You might use Notion for work projects that need a structured database, but then use Obsidian for personal knowledge management, research, or creative writing.
It's all about finding the right tool for the job.
Exactly. And if you're still not sure which one is for you, my advice is to experiment.
Try them both out.
Absolutely. Both apps have free versions, so play around with them, see what the features are like, and figure out which one feels more natural to you.
That's great advice. It's all about finding the tool that helps you think better and work smarter.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
But before you rush off to download everything, let's take a step back for a second and consider the bigger picture here. We've talked about features, pricing, but what about the underlying philosophies of these apps? So we've talked about features, we talked about price, but what about the philosophy behind these apps? Like, it seems to me that Notion, with its database structure, is all about order. Like creating this perfectly labeled library where everything has its place.
That's a great way to put it, actually. Notion is really good at managing information in that structured, top-down way.
Yeah.
It's great for projects, lists, databases, but it can kind of lead to a more linear way of thinking.
So you might end up with this super organized workspace, but you miss out on those unexpected connections, the kind that can lead to real breakthroughs.
Exactly, and that's where Obsidian's philosophy is so different. With the backlinks in the knowledge graph, it's all about a more emergent approach to knowledge.
Okay.
It's like planting a seed and then watching it grow into this network of interconnected ideas.
Wow.
You don't know where it's going to go, but the discovery is part of the fun.
It's like planning a trip down to the minute versus just setting off with a map and a sense of adventure.
Yeah, both are good, but with that second one, there's more room for, like, happy accidents.
And sometimes those detours lead to the most interesting stuff.
Exactly. That's what I love about Obsidian. It's not just about storing information, it's about really understanding it.
Yeah. One of the articles even described their Obsidian Vault as a living organism. It's like constantly growing as they add new notes and make new connections.
That's the magic of it. Notion is awesome for managing info, but Obsidian is for thinking.
It really makes you embrace the messiness of thought, doesn't it?
It does. It lets you follow those tangents and see where they lead.
Wow, this has been such a great deep dive. We went way beyond just comparing features.
Yeah, for sure.
We got into the philosophy behind these apps and how they can actually change the way we think and work.
And at the end of the day, the best tool is the one that works for you.
The one that helps you capture your ideas.
Yeah, and explore your curiosity.
So for anyone listening who's ready to jump into the world of note-taking apps, remember, experiment.
Yes. Both Notion and Obsidian have free versions.
Try them out, play around with the features, and see which one clicks.
Find the one that brings you joy.
Love that. It's all about finding the tool that helps you think better, work smarter,
Absolutely.
and unleash that creative potential.
For sure.
We'd love to hear your thoughts, by the way. Let us know which app you chose and why. Share on our website or social media. And until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting,
All right.
and keep diving deep.